this bottom shelf and it's full of all these cake pans. And then halfway through, I think it was, you had to pull all that out and reverse them. The lower ones went on the
So
top.
they got equal heat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she would wrap these up really nice, the baked cakes, in, I guess it was like saran wrap or something. She would often probably cut out of a Christmas card from the year before or something. You know, she didn't waste anything. And maybe you'd have a poinsettia or something pretty, and she would put that right on the middle, you know, like the hole in the middle of the fruitcake. So that was covered and wrapped up real pretty, and then a pretty red bow, and it was just, I mean, so Christmassy, and I was just always impressed. And the top even, she would carefully even balanced a whole, you know, a half pecan pieces, how they would be, and
Detail.
everything. And she would even make the grapefruit peel. Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
The thick peeling on a yellow grapefruit, and she would save that, and then she would candy those, and then that was part of her fruitcake mix.
Did you ever get the
So
recipe?
innovative. Yeah. I'm not giving you that.
I just got my great-grandmother's recipe for her pecan cake, so only because my mother can't make it anymore.
Well, I think I said that to say that the people back then maybe didn't have one vocation or
Yeah.
anything that they really did. They just looked for opportunity, and they would do something. And I'm amazed at grandmother and how well she did, how hard she worked. I'm sure she never finished school. And by the way, when mother went over here, 8th grade was it. She said they had 2 rooms, a big room and a little room. And you went graduated from the little room to the big room, and then you were done. And that was 8th grade.
And she finished through 8th grade.
Well, she graduated from Lyman.
From Lyman. Oh, that's right. That's right. You gave us.
And by the way, of the 4 graduation rings, I have 2 and 32. The first 4 rings Lyman ever issued. I have 2.
Wow.
Still have those rings. And
That's a treasure.
but he would do whatever he had to do in order to gain a little money. Grandmother, through selling cakes and chickens and milk and all that, she eventually accumulated enough to buy a little home here or there, and she would rent those homes. I'm amazed at how she did that.
How industrious, yeah.
Yeah, she was able to do that.
She never had Social Security.
Right.
Yeah.
That's too far back. And she was, like he said, very resourceful, hard worker.
Had to be.
Going through the Great Depression probably would do that to you.
That's right.
Well, it affected everyone. Mother was that way. There was no food that went out. We ate it all.
Yeah.
And if it went out, it was nothing left. That was it. So, unlike some ways today, we waste so much.
I was just thinking the same thing.
She never did that.
Yeah.
And there was no problem. Once in a while, she'd buy a ham, and you'd see ham or remnants of ham for a few days.
She would squeeze everything out of it. And then you boil the bone, which they now know bone broth is incredibly good for us,
And we had
for our health. But
a pretty good sized
anyways.
garden in the back, always. And I remember growing up, we had a garden and citrus trees. That I had 40 odd trees here when I bought the property, and there were a few over at the old place that Granddad had planted. And people would come around and they'd want to pick the fruit and pay you for it. I don't see that anymore. The times have changed, and Longwood has changed a lot. I used to pick the school bus up right in the middle of what is now 434 because it did not go across 427. It was the end of it right there, and there was no crossing. And the little road that goes through downtown, which is Warren, eventually came back into what now is 434, where it does. Still comes in. And
Because 434 wasn't there at that point, you're saying?
it didn't extend
was
beyond
here.
427.
Okay.
Not paved anyway.
Uh-huh.
You could go, the road that went out to Forest City was clay. And they graded that San Leonard Springs and followed the same path it does now, the best I can remember. And we used to get the bus there. And Lyman High School had 2 buses when I started, and both of those buses made 2 runs apiece, and that took all the kids to school. And our driver, when we moved here, lived out off E.E. Williamson Road, and he'd come pick us up, take us to school, and drop us off, and then go to Castleberry, Altamont, pick up all those kids and bring them back to school. So we had at least an hour, hour and a half before and after school, before he'd go back home.
Wow.
So that was, Mother can remember somebody in town here had made a truck sort of thing, converted it into sort of a makeshift school bus, and used to bus kids around.
Oh, honey, tell them about, and this was a tradition back then. Word would get around if you were a good cook. You were telling about hobos and people that would come through.
We used to have people and that were homeless that would come knock on your door and ask for food. They were hungry. Mother never turned one down. She'd always say, "Well, come around the back porch." She'd always stir up something.
That seems to have been, I think, a mentality of that generation, because I hear the same stories about my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother in North Carolina, would always keep food handy for anyone who came knocking looking for food, and she'd bring them around the back of the house and feed them.
Wow.
So I think that's a remnant of that generation that's just been lost.
Well, before we started recording, you were talking about what you heard about the old hooker homestead with the big long table and the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess they were sort of unofficial places, as boarding houses, but not really advertised as such. But
Word of mouth.
when people were traveling, strangers coming to town, they needed a place to stay, and usually
Place
I
to
understand
eat,
from Mother that
something.
Grandma Hooker would say, "Oh, yeah, I'd come there," and she would feed them, and always had plenty of food there for them. So they, Nancy and Annie fished in that lake a lot, and a lot of times for supper.
On Trout Lake.
Yes, and there used to be a place on toward the south end of the lake where the road used to go around the lake. You can't
Anchor.
get through there
Now
anymore.
it's Anchor.
But there was a swimming hole there, and that was a place to go swim in a lake. And the churches baptized people in that lake, and I was baptized in that lake, and probably my mother. I don't know for
sister
sure.
too,
But yeah,
right?
we were.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago. So,
So I heard that the owner or the editor of the Orlando Sentinel, Martin Anderson, I don't know if you know anything about this, that he owns some property right around here. Do you know anything about that?
yeah, he owned the site that the townhomes are on
They
here.
just built it,
around
yeah.
the lake. He didn't own all of that, but the majority of the west end of it. And he had that irrigated out of the lake. Huge pump down in the pump house, and sprinklers that were 70, 80 feet in the air, like huge giant rainbirds that border the whole place. He planted those pine trees, which are still there, and he specialized in azaleas and camellias. And this little lake that's right back over here, this pond at the end of Lake Street, was a source of muck, and he dug that out and utilized that muck for his works and hit a spring, so that became a little lake.
Yeah, that lake over there, right along 434. I've researched a lot of that because they say it's spring fed, and they tried to fill it in and straighten the highway many times. And They said they just couldn't get it because they're so deep.
I've heard that. I don't know. I've heard stories of cars and trucks and whatnot in the lake, but I don't know. Maybe so. But it is spring fed. It's spring. It goes from there into Ferry Lake and the Walmer Lake and the Catherine, and you literally can get in that pond and end up in the Atlantic Ocean.
Wow.
I mean, if you have a small enough canoe. But the water flows that way into the St. John's eventually. Yeah.
Do you recall anything about? Sorry, I'm asking about some things now that aren't necessarily your family, but
Sure.
you recall like Hibbert Castleberry and some of the, Castleberry versus Fern Park drama?
No, not too much about that. I just knew that there was a lot of fernery business from over there that was fed to the railroad. Utilized a lot of local labor to do that. It was pretty labor intensive. And Castleberry came down and basically built a little town there. And that's relatively recent comparatively. But I don't know much
1940.
about that. It just was always there, as far back as I can remember. But it's the new town in the area. And Winter Springs, of course, that's all brand new.
What do you think about all the changes? Do you all lament, or you just say, "Hey, it just is"?
Some of them obviously are good, but some of the old times are pretty special, and because medicines and things like that are so good now that we all benefit from that. But there's even as far back as I can remember, I miss the cow looking at me over the fence out there, or chickens cackling, or a rooster crowing in the morning, or having to milk the cow. My job was to milk the cow every afternoon, fix the feed and milk the cow, gather the eggs, close the chickens up at night to keep the critters out. That sort of thing.
It wasn't a slower life, but maybe a quieter life.
Well,
because you had to work so hard, so it really wasn't a slower times. But
I can remember in the summer when we were out of school, we'd have breakfast in the morning, and even we were out, and Mother just knew we were somewhere in the woods or the acreage around here somewhere.
Yeah.
Usually show up for lunch and then back out again, and many times she'd have to call us in for dark. And I think that being able to socialize with other kids in the neighborhood, and they didn't all have to be the same age. All 12 grades were at Lyman School, and there were many brothers and sisters of little kids that were in school. And so when we get together to play baseball out here in the cow pasture, we'd run the old cow into the barn, and there'd be seniors and little grade school kids all out there playing, and we'd choose sides up proportionally. And there was never any big squabble about that. And the seniors could hit the ball out of sight, and the little guys could do that, but they understood, and everybody seemed to enjoy that. And it was just the way it is. Now you don't see kids out playing in the
community.
There's nobody playing in the cow pasture, or it's organized, and you've got to have the uniform and the training and the helmet and all that stuff,
I think my generation was probably the last generation that roamed free during the day, left the house in the morning, and didn't come home till the streetlights came on.
Yeah,
Because I have the same memories of eating breakfast and being gone. But my son, who's in his 30s, sure didn't live life that way.
I would get on a bicycle. I can remember getting on a bike when I finally got a bicycle big enough to ride it okay. Standard side. It was a J.C. Higgins from Sears Roebuck. But I would tell Mother, I'm going for a ride. She'd say, okay. And I always rode up to get the mail from the post office. Always would do that. Because we had a post office box where Pete's Eats is now. That used to be the little post office. And I might be gone 2-3 hours, who knows? And I didn't know where I was going. I'd ride around. I might find somebody else. We'd ride around and ride up and down the street. There were no bike paths. There were no bike lanes.
There were no cell phones to get in contact with you.
We would go to the train station. That was a favorite place. And there was a ramp on the south end of the station where they could pull, what do you call them, trucks, but they were railroad carts. Pull a truck up on that ramp to get it up. The floor level was even with a freight car. and there were two big boxes there, a north and a southbound box. They put the mail in. Either when the train came, they put the mail in there, they'd take it off. We used to ride our bikes up that ramp, and there was a fair-sized platform area that was open, and stand on the edge of that platform while those steam engines come through there at 60 miles an hour or as fast as they could go. It was quite a thrill.
Yeah.
But it was
And your
memorable.
mom had no idea what you were doing.
I don't think we ever did anything really dangerous or foolish.
Yeah.
But it was always, it was something, it was interesting, it was something to do. And if northbound trains, these are all steam engines, would stop, and the engines many times would be sitting right across where 434 is now. And we'd walk down there with the engine, walk right up to them, right up to those big engines, and try to put pennies under the wheels while they were sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
And the engineer and the fireman are fussing us, go. And if it was a heavily loaded train, before they would go forward, they would back up really slow and take all the slack out, every coupling as far back to the caboose, so they didn't have a dead pull of the entire way. And then they start that train. Then it was always our hope that they would spin the wheels, and occasionally they did, and that was really a big thing because they'd have to do it again.
And that train station was right across from where the post office was, behind Connolly's Pub.
Yes, on the same side of the track, and pretty much right up to the Church Street there, pretty close there, and it stretched along. And it was typical. It had a platform that went from the north end and from the south end, and then in the center there was a bulged out kind of area, a little, so the guy could look down the track. And they would put mail bags on the I think they called it the tree, which was a metal stand that was sitting close to the track, and they put the mail pouch up there and fasten it at the top and the bottom, and there was a belt they put around the center of it, so it was held tight. And those trains had come through, the mail car would operate a hook that would go out and catch that bag and sweep it into the car, and they would sort mail in the car. I can remember trains going by with mail cars and people there sorting letters, where'd they go with the train zooming down the track.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally the bag wouldn't come loose, they'd tear it open and the letters would fly.
So that's why sometimes the mail didn't come.
But there was,
You'd be like, well, I sent you a letter.
My granddad Whitehead was responsible for posting and retrieving the mail in Altamont, and carried it to the post office in Altamont. And here, the last guy I remember doing that was Ben Gray, who was also a barber, and he lived on
Was it Palmetto?
Palmetto, I believe.
Okay.
But he would take care of that. And I think Granddad Frayne also did some mail work. You had to sit there and wait for the train. You're not too sure when it's coming, and secure the mail, and put it up when it came. I can remember the postmaster here was Coach Payne's mother. And once in a while, as I would go into the post office to get a mail, she'd ask me if I'd deliver a letter for her. It was a special delivery letter, and I'd pedal around. I knew where everybody lived.
She give me a nickel or something?
I know. I didn't take any money. I just had to do it for her. But I can remember delivering a few letters that way.
You know, that's the thing that strikes me about this, the contrast. You said something about the contrast over the years. People were nice. I mean, there's an awful lot of good people now, and sadly, that's what you read about in the paper is all the bad guys. But everybody kind of knew each other, and even when the kids were acting up, he said, "I know your daddy." You know,
well,
better straighten up. You know,
I had.
It's like a huge family.
A feeling of community.
Yeah.
That's been lost.
Hetty Arnett, later McNamara, as she's most known by, was a sixth grade school teacher. And she was a cousin of mother's cousin, so she's some distant cousin to me. And that doll belonged to her, or maybe her mother, I don't know. But it came out of her house, and her house is over on Bay Street, still there. But she was my sixth grade teacher. She knew my mother from way back before she was born. And then Mrs. North was the math teacher, and she had taught my parents. And Mrs. Hartley, I think, I'm not sure she taught my parents, but they were older ladies, and you didn't give them any slack. And if there was an issue, that Miss North would always send the misbehaving boys, and the girls never misbehaved, to Coach Payne's class. And I can remember
This is
sitting,
at Lyman.
Yeah.
sitting in science class, and there'd be a rap on the door, and he'd look over and he'd motion who were to come in.
Oh dear.
And they'd say, "Well, Miss North sent me in." He'd bend them over the table right in front of the class, and give them 2 or 3 licks, and we'd go out. And it was we didn't really celebrate. It was just the way things were. It was
Right.
just the norm.
Right.
And
Probably effective.
it was. It was very effective. I've been there, done that. So,
He turned out really
Stopped you, right?
yeah. And that was just the way it did. And at recess, there was a period in every school year where marbles was a big deal, and people would go play marble.
Mm-hmm.
There was a yo-yo season. There was a water pistol season. And we all carried biggest pocket knives we could get.
Mm-hmm.
And
Nobody questioned
issues.
it. No issues.
It was not
and there
hurt
wasn't
somebody.
it wasn't
It was-
real organized.
You
kind
might
of
need it.
recess. It would just go out there and blow some steam off and
Yeah.
come back here when it's over. And there'd be teachers around here or there, but we weren't doing anything
Mm-hmm.
as a one big group. And the guys that sit around and we'd play with pocket knives. There's games you could play with pocket knives. You know, and
Throwing knives.
open them up and throw them up,
Yeah.
and stick them in the ground, or playing tricks with them, all that stuff. They just did that. And
Now it
I think
sounds
kids, I think so many kids now don't have a good appreciation of planting a seed in a furrow and watching the plant come up, and then go picking the beans and preparing them to help do that, or pulling an ear of corn, or opening a watermelon up. I can remember going after the prime melons came off the vines, and you have other melons that generally are not as good a quality, and pretty soon they're just everywhere. I can remember going out here in a watermelon patch and picking up a melon in the patch and dropping it on the ground, and it would crack open, and just scoop the inside out and eat it right out in the middle of the field.
and you probably can't even imagine.
Kids,
What?
how many kids
Yeah,
have
I
done
can.
that? Or go out and pull an old setting hen off the nest so you could get the eggs, and she's squawking and pecking at you and everything. Get her off the
And
nest so you
feel
could
how
get the eggs out of the
silky
nest.
feathers feel.
Or milking
in the
the
water.
cow.
Yeah.
And the rhythm to that.
Yeah.
Rhythm.
Or pigs. You always had to feed the pigs. I can remember calves. We would keep calves up until a certain age and then sell them, because we didn't want any more cows. They were milk cows. But I can remember in the process of weaning the cow, you make up a sort of a gruel out of milk and some sort of grain, fine ground grain, and put that in a bucket. And the cow's not quite ready to eat that.
Right.
So you take 2 fingers, put that down in a bucket, hold them apart just enough, and that cow could use that like a straw, the space between your 2 fingers. You got the fingers stuck up to the cow's nose, who has good teeth. But they would pull everything out there they could get.
Yeah.
So, and you brush them down. And the old milk cow used to come up. If we were in the garden and had picked peanuts or peas, mostly peanuts, because you pull a whole vine up and take
Thank
those
you
up,
so much.
take those up to the house and pick the peanuts off. That cow could smell that from anywhere out here. Next thing you know, she's looking at you as close as she can get to the house, just looking at you, waiting for you to bring the vines out there to her. And she obviously enjoyed them. And she'd love to have her neck rubbed in behind her horns, behind her head, because she couldn't get back there, behind the ears and all that. I miss that.
Did you tell them about kudzu? Are you guys familiar with kudzu?
No.
Kudzu has covered all of South Georgia. It's that vine that runs everywhere.
Okay.
You can see it covering trees, hanging down.
Granddad bought some of that and planted it over there because he
Is that
thought
with
it
the
was-
purple flowers? Okay.
He planted some over there and he thought it was be a good thing to enrich the soil or something. Stuff went wild and the cows just love it. And it would grow all up and down the fences, and that was okay, but it got over the fence and the cows would just lean into that. And frequently, occasionally, our cow would get out. But it wasn't uncommon to see a cow loose in the neighborhood. You might see some from somewhere. The lady on the corner right down here across from 7-Eleven, she had a cow in her yard, just staked in the yard, no fence, just there.
That was common back, yeah.
We kept ours in the fence. And
Like a dog, just tethered.
yeah, so back to our times better now than they were. If I were to get seriously ill, I'd say I'd rather be now. But if I could go back and live a few days back then, I think I would enjoy that. Very
Me
much.
too.
Me too.
And
You guys really,
around
as young
here,
as you are, I'm hearing that.
I'm not as young as you think.
Longwood
Thank
was just a
compliment.
sleepy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Longwood was just a sleepy little town, and Altamont was a more tourist town, I should
Yeah.
say.
Right.
And Lake Mary was, I guess, I don't remember really much about Lake Mary growing up. It was a small little store or so there, but Sanford was the town,
Yeah.
and we would go and at school year and buy clothes in Sanford, or have to go all the way to Orlando to Sears down on Orange Avenue to buy any school clothes.
Downtown.
You couldn't get it anywhere.
My mother remembers that in the 60s, Castleberry was the place to be because of all of the liquor and the bars, and everything was open on Sunday. My grandparents lived in Altamont when I was born in the 60s.
See, we never had shopping centers.
Well, there was-
I remember when the first one was built.
There was a bar in Longwood right at the